20 minutes. That is the warning window. Not hours, not the kind of warning where you pack a bag and drive to safety. 20 minutes between the first signal and lava in the streets. And right now, beneath the Reykjanes Peninsula in southwest Iceland, the magma reservoir that has been feeding 7 eruptions in 4 years has just reached the highest recorded volume since scientists began measuring it. More magma stored than at any point before any previous eruption in this cycle. The Icelandic Meteorological Office is not using the word dormant. They stopped using that word 2 years ago. They are using a different word now, primed. Here is what this video covers. The Reykjanes Peninsula is where the mid-Atlantic ridge surfaces above the ocean, the place where the North American plate and the Eurasian plate are pulling apart, and magma from the mantle below fills the gap. For 800 years, this peninsula was quiet. Then, in March 2281, it woke up. And in the 4 years since, it has erupted 7 times. Each eruption preceded by the same sequence. Magma fills the reservoir, the ground inflates, the inflation reaches a threshold, a dike propagates from the reservoir toward the surface, lava appears. The interval between the dike leaving the reservoir and lava reaching the surface, 20 minutes, sometimes less. But here's the detail that no coverage is explaining correctly. The 7 previous eruptions occurred in relatively uninhabited areas of the peninsula, lava fields, open ground. The magma reservoir that just hit its record volume sits directly beneath a town of 4,000 people, a town that has already been evacuated 3 times, a town whose residents are currently at home because the government let them return 20 minutes from the next eruption. Stay with me, because what is stored beneath the Reykjanes Peninsula right now is not just a geological record, it is a countdown that nobody can stop and nobody can time. The Reykjanes Peninsula is a spit of volcanic rock jutting southwest from Iceland into the North Atlantic. It is geologically young by the standards of even Iceland, itself one of the youngest land masses on Earth. The Reykjanes Peninsula is freshly made. It sits directly on the mid-Atlantic ridge, the underwater mountain chain that marks the boundary between the North American and Eurasian plates. Where the ridge surfaces above water, the geology is raw. Fissures, geothermal fields, lava fields of every age, some centuries old, some still warm. And running beneath it, a network of magma intrusion pathways fed directly by the mantle, upwelling of a spreading center that is pulling the plates apart at roughly 2.5 centimeters per year. For 800 years, from approximately 1240 AD to 2021, the Reykjanes Peninsula was in a volcanic repose period, long enough for communities to form on its surface, long enough for a geothermal power plant, the Svartsengi power station, to be built above its hottest ground, long enough for the Blue Lagoon, one of Iceland's most famous tourist attractions, to be constructed in its lava fields, long enough for the town of Grindavík, a fishing community of 4,000 people, to build houses, schools, and a harbor on the peninsula's southern coast. Long enough for people to forget what 800 years of stillness was hiding. In March 2021, a fissure opened on the Fagradalsfjall volcanic system, one of several volcanic systems active on the peninsula. No lava had emerged from this part of Iceland in 6,000 years. The eruption lasted 6 months. It drew 1 million tourists. It was beautiful. It was distant from any town. It felt like an event, a spectacle with a start and an end. It was not an event. It was the beginning of a reactivation cycle that has not ended. After the 2021 Fagradalsfjall eruption ended, the peninsula did not return to repose. In 2022, another eruption. In August 2023, another. Then the pattern changed. In November 2023, the eruption activity shifted from Fagradalsfjall to a different volcanic system, Svartsengi, closer to Grindavík, closer to the power plant, closer to 4,000 people's homes. And the Svartsengi eruptions did not behave the way the Fagradalsfjall eruptions had. The Fagradalsfjall eruptions were slow, patient events, lava welling up steadily over weeks and months from an open fissure. The Svartsengi eruptions were something different, rapid inflation, sudden dike propagation, lava appearing within 20 to 30 minutes of the first detectable signal. In December 2023, the ground beneath Grindavík cracked open, fissures split roads, houses dropped into subsidences. The town was evacuated at 2 a.m., with residents given under an hour's notice. In January 2024, eruption. In February 2024, eruption. In May 2024, eruption. In August 2024, eruption. Each one from the Svartsengi system, each one following the same rapid onset sequence. And between each eruption, the same observable process. The Svartsengi magma reservoir inflates. GPS stations around the reservoir, some of the most precisely monitored ground deformation instruments in the world, measure the inflation in millimeters per day. As inflation approaches the pre-eruptive threshold documented in previous cycles, eruption follows. The IMO has calibrated that threshold through 7 eruption cycles. They know what the graph looks like before lava appears. And the graph right now This week shows the reservoir at its highest recorded volume, higher than before any previous eruption in this cycle, which means one of two things. Either the threshold has moved higher and the eruption is still coming, just from a larger reservoir, or the system is about to produce something larger than anything it has produced in 4 years. The IMO does not yet know which. When volcanologists say a magma reservoir has reached a record volume, they mean something precise. The Svartsengi reservoir sits at a depth of approximately 3 to 5 kilometers beneath the peninsula. It is not a cavern. It is not an underground lake of lava. It is a zone of partially molten rock, magma forcing itself into the spaces between solid rock, pushing the rock apart, inflating the ground above it in a measurable, trackable dome. The GPS stations surrounding Svartsengi measure that dome. As magma accumulates, the ground rises. The amount of ground rise, combined with the spatial pattern of how the ground deforms, allows scientists to calculate how much magma has been added to the reservoir. The calculation involves modeling the reservoir as an inflating body at known depth, fitting the surface deformation pattern to constrain the volume and location. It is not a direct measurement. It is a model-derived estimate, but it is the best available picture of what is building below. And the picture right now shows a volume of magma that exceeds every previous measurement in this eruption cycle. Here is why that matters in ways the number alone doesn't convey. Larger magma volume stored in the reservoir means more material available to feed an eruption. More material available means longer eruption duration, potentially, or higher lava output rates, potentially, or a larger dike propagating further from the reservoir when the system finally vents, potentially. Any of those outcomes changes the footprint of the next eruption compared to previous ones. Previous eruptions occurred in lava fields north and northeast of Grindavík, following fissure lines that opened on the peninsula's sparsely populated interior. The record reservoir volume raises a question that the IMO is modeling now. Whether the next dike follows the same pathways as previous eruptions, or whether more stored magma drives a larger intrusion that finds a different path, a path that existing lava barriers were not built to stop. Grindavík should not be a place where people live right now. That is not a cruel statement. It is the honest assessment of the volcanic hazard that the ground beneath it represents. Since December 2023, the town has been formally evacuated 3 times. Residents have been displaced from their homes, in some cases for months at a time, while the government and the IMO assessed whether return was safe. Each time, the assessment concluded that the immediate eruption risk had decreased enough to allow return. Each time, the residents came back, unpacked, reconnected utilities, sent children back to school, tried to resume something that felt like normal life in a town that sits above a volcanic system that has erupted 4 times in 14 months. The Icelandic government has been honest about the situation in ways that most governments managing hazard zones are not. Officials have stated publicly that Grindavík may not be a viable permanent settlement in its current location. The conversation about whether to relocate the town permanently, not evacuate temporarily, but physically move 4,000 people and their community off the peninsula, is a conversation that is happening in Icelandic parliament right now. It has not been resolved. The residents have a voice in it. Many of them do not want to leave. This is their home, their harbor, their livelihood, the community their families have built for generations. And the IMO's current data shows the system that has already disrupted their lives 3 times in 18 months is now storing more magma than ever before. The evacuation barriers, the berms of bulldozed earth built at the edge of town to redirect lava flows, are the physical expression of a policy question that has not been answered. Whether to protect a town that may be unprotectable, or to accept that the 800 years of repose that allowed Grindavík to be built is over, and that the ground it was built on belongs to the volcano now. 20 minutes, let's make that number concrete. The distance from the center of Grindavík to the Suðurlandsbraut highway, the primary evacuation route north toward Reykjavik, is approximately 5 kilometers. At 60 kilometers per hour, that drive takes 5 minutes under normal conditions. At 2 a.m., when the evacuation alert fires, when every resident of the town is simultaneously waking up and getting in a car, it does not take 5 minutes, it takes longer. In the December 2023 evacuation, the first alert went to residents at approximately 2:30 a.m. The evacuation was completed, the last residents cleared from the town, in approximately 90 minutes. The eruption began shortly after. 90 minutes. The evacuation took 90 minutes. The warning window for a Svartsengi eruption is 20 minutes. Those two numbers do not coexist safely. The reason the December 2023 evacuation succeeded, the reason everyone got out, is that the IMO recognized the signals far enough in advance to issue the alert before the dike had propagated to the critical point. They had more than 20 minutes on that occasion, not because the system gave them more, because the geophysicists watching the GPS data and the seismograph feeds made the call early enough. They used scientific judgment to extend the effective warning window beyond what the geology alone provides. That judgment, the decision to call the evacuation before the threshold is crossed, is the difference between an empty town and a catastrophe. It has worked 6 times. The system is now storing more magma than before any of those 6 events. The IMO scientists who make that call are watching a graph they have not seen before, at a level they have not calibrated against. And the town they are protecting is currently occupied. The Icelandic Meteorological Office operates one of the most sophisticated volcano monitoring networks in the world, scaled remarkably to a country of 370,000 people. The Reykjanes Peninsula instruments include GPS stations measuring ground deformation in real time, seismic arrays detecting the micro-earthquakes that occur along dike margins as magma forces its way through rock, INSAR satellite data, radar interferometry from orbit, mapping millimeter-scale surface deformation across the entire peninsula every time a satellite passes, tilt meters, strain meters, gas sensors measuring SO2 and CO2 output from the geothermal vents that vent the reservoir's gases ahead of any surface eruption. All of it streaming to the IMO's monitoring center in Reykjavik, the specific signals the IMO is watching for the onset of the next eruption. The signatures that have preceded each previous eruption in this cycle are a spike in microseismicity along the Svartsengi fissure trend. These are the small earthquakes caused by rock fracturing as the dike begins to propagate. A rapid change in GPS deformation, a sudden shift in the direction or rate of ground movement as the reservoir begins to drain into the propagating dike. INSAR coherence loss, the satellite measurement becoming unstable over the area of active intrusion, as the ground moves too fast for the radar to track cleanly. When those 3 signals appear simultaneously, the seismicity, the GPS shift, the INSAR anomaly, the IMO issues the evacuation alert. That is the trigger. And the interval between that trigger and lava at the surface, 20 minutes. The monitoring system has been calibrated to issue the alert before the trigger if possible, using the pre-eruptive inflation data to project when the trigger is likely to occur, giving the town more than 20 minutes when the science allows. The record reservoir volume complicates that projection, because the projection is calibrated to previous eruptions. At volumes the system has not produced before, the projection has less history to lean on. The IMO is doing what scientists do when they reach the edge of their calibration, watching more carefully, making the call more conservatively, erring earlier. Here is the historical anchor that makes the record reservoir volume impossible to read as routine. The last time the Reykjanes Peninsula experienced a period of sustained volcanic reactivation, an eruption cycle comparable to what began in 2021, was approximately 800 years ago. Between roughly 1210 and 1240 AD, the Reykjanes Peninsula experienced a series of eruptions that geologists call the Reykjanes fires. Multiple fissure eruptions, significant lava output, a period of volcanic activity that reshaped the southwestern tip of Iceland and then ended, leaving behind the lava fields on which Grindavík and the Blue Lagoon and the Svartsengi power station were eventually built. Those 800 years of quiet were not guaranteed. The paleological record, the preserved lava sequences and sediment layers that record Iceland's eruption history, shows that the Reykjanes Peninsula experiences these reactivation periods periodically, active for decades, then quiet for centuries, then active again. The 2021 eruption ended 800 years of the quiet phase. What is not clear from the geological record, what the 800-year gap in instrumental monitoring makes impossible to know, is how the current reactivation compares to previous ones in terms of total magma output, eruption frequency, and duration. The 1210 to 1240 AD event lasted approximately 30 years. The current reactivation is 4 years old. The record magma storage now accumulating in Svartsengi, is it the peak of a cycle that is about to begin declining? Or is it the early inflation of a system that has decades of eruptions ahead? The geological record can tell us both have happened before. It cannot tell us which one is happening now. The IMO scientists reading the inflation graph this week do not have 800 years of data to compare it to. They have 4 years. And the graph is higher than anything in those 4 years. There are 3 ways to read a record magma volume in the Svartsengi reservoir. The reservoir has accumulated more magma than before any previous eruption, but the system will vent through the same fissure pathways that have characterized every previous eruption in this cycle. The eruption will be larger in lava volume and duration, but geographically consistent with what has come before. The lava barriers north of Grindavík may be tested more severely. The eruption may last longer, days instead of hours, potentially weeks. But the footprint remains north of the town in the peninsula's interior. The defensive earthworks hold. The town is evacuated, watches the eruption from the evacuation zones, and returns when it ends. Under this interpretation, the record volume is quantitatively unprecedented but qualitatively familiar. Its weakness, the larger the volume, the more energy available to drive a dike further from the reservoir, potentially beyond the geographic envelope of previous events. The record reservoir volume reflects not just accumulated magma from one cycle, but the early expression of a longer reactivation period than 4 years implies. The peninsula entered its reactivation phase in 2021. Under this reading, the system is not winding down toward a quiescent interval, it is winding up. The magma supply rate from the mantle below is increasing, or has been consistent enough that the reservoir is accumulating volume faster than individual eruptions can vent it. Each eruption releases some material. The reservoir refills faster than the previous cycle's rate implied. This produces an increasing baseline volume between eruptions, and eventually an eruption scale that exceeds anything the current cycle has produced. Under this interpretation, the conversation about whether Grindavík is viable long-term is not a future policy question. It is a present operational one. The record volume drives a dike that does not follow existing pathways. Previous eruptions opened along fissure systems to the north of Grindavík, the Sundhnúkur crater row. A larger dike, with more pressure behind it, could propagate to a different surface location, closer to the town, through the town, or into the harbor zone to the south. The lava barriers were built for the northern pathway. A southern pathway would bypass them. This interpretation does not require a dramatically different geology. It requires only that a larger volume of magma drives a dike that finds a lower resistance path than any previous intrusion, and that lower resistance path is not the one the barriers were built to block. The probability assigned to this third interpretation by any IMO scientist is lower than the first two. It is not zero, and the consequence of the third interpretation being correct and Grindavík being occupied when it occurs is the consequence that makes the current monitoring situation the most serious in Iceland's recent volcanic history. Here is what the IMO knows with confidence. The Svartsengi reservoir has inflated to its highest recorded volume. The inflation is ongoing. The system is not deflating. The pre-eruptive indicators are elevated but have not yet crossed the eruption onset threshold. Here is what the IMO knows with high confidence, but cannot state as certainty. That when the threshold is crossed, and the historical pattern indicates it will be crossed, the onset will be rapid. 20 minutes from detectable dike propagation to lava at the surface. Possibly less, if the record volume drives a faster or more forceful intrusion than previous events. Here is what the IMO genuinely cannot know: where the next dike goes. The fissure pathways of the Svartsengi system are mapped from previous eruptions. They are the routes magma has taken before. They are not the only routes the rock makes available. At record reservoir volume, at pressures not previously observed in the instrumental record of this cycle, the system may find a path of least resistance that has not been a path before. The monitoring data will show a dike propagating. It will show the direction of propagation within minutes of onset. Those minutes, in the 20-minute window, are the minutes in which the IMO determines whether this eruption follows the expected pattern or a new one. And in those same minutes, Grindavík's residents are getting in their cars. Let's go back to the monitoring screen. The IMO's Reykjanes monitoring room. A screen showing the GPS inflation data from the Svartsengi network. A curve, rising. The x-axis, time. The y-axis, ground displacement. The surface rising as magma fills the reservoir below. The curve shows the inflation leading up to each previous eruption. 6 separate eruption events marked on the graph, each preceded by inflation to a specific level, followed by a sudden deflation as the magma vented. 6 times this curve climbed to its threshold. 6 times it dropped when lava reached the surface. 6 times the IMO read this curve and made the call. The curve, right now, is above all 6 of those thresholds, higher than before any previous eruption in this cycle. Still climbing. The scientists reading it have never seen this part of the graph before. They know the shape of what precedes it. They have seen that 6 times. They do not know the shape of what follows. The record volume is the territory beyond the edge of the map. Outside in the town, the residents of Grindavík are living their lives. Some of them keep bags packed by the door. They know the routine. They have done the evacuation 3 times. They know the sound of the emergency alert on their phones. They know which roads get congested. They know the assembly points. They have adapted to living inside a 20-minute warning window in a way that most humans will never be asked to adapt. Because the alternative, leaving permanently, is a loss they are not ready to accept. And the IMO scientists watching the graph understand that. They are watching on behalf of the people whose 20 minutes they are responsible for, watching a curve that has never gone this high, waiting for the signal they have seen 6 times, the sudden shift in GPS direction, the seismicity spike, the INSAR anomaly, that tells them the magma has left the reservoir. The graph is still rising. The reservoir has more magma in it than at any point in the 4-year record. And the town 12 kilometers to the south is still there. The bags are packed by the door, the phones are set to receive the alert, and the curve keeps climbing toward a threshold no one has mapped yet. In the ground beneath the oldest fishing town in Iceland's youngest lava field. Still rising. because the mantle below the mid-Atlantic ridge has not been told that this is unprecedented. It is just doing what it has been doing for 800 years, filling the space